Welcome to Study Session 6, The Failure of Mass Literacy Campaigns. Introduction. In this study session, we will define mass literacy campaign by identifying its features and objectives. We will also discuss the efforts of various bodies connected with the literacy campaign and highlight the constraints which make the failure of the campaigns inevitable. Learning outcomes. When you have studied this session, you should be able to identify the features of mass literacy campaign and list the objectives of the literacy campaign. Discuss the efforts of the various bodies connected with the literacy campaign and examine the factors which hindered the campaign. Literacy campaign. Campaign as an operation intended to achieve specific goals, and literacy as the ability to read, write, and acquire skills are the two key words in this session. The initiative for the launching of the earliest mass literacy campaign in Africa was taken by Britain. The World War II had exposed how poor and backward African countries were. Soldiers recruited in Africa were illiterate and made mistakes in identifying signals and recognizing orders, and could not read instructions, correspondence, or newspapers. A special arrangement had been made to give the soldiers courses in literacy. It was on this literacy project that Arthur Carpenter worked, and it was because of his creditable performance that he was promoted to the grade of Major. The British government decided to examine government policy towards development in the colonies. To this end, a special grant titled the Colonial Development and Welfare Fund was provided. Pilot projects were also started in many parts of Africa. Eventually, mass literacy campaigns were launched, all of which, without exception, failed. One reason that has been given for the failure of the campaigns was that none of them was really a campaign. A campaign is a military term. It means a swift action aimed at a prompt solution to a problem. A campaign is always planned thoroughly and given adequate infrastructure and ammunition. The personnel are often well trained and given necessary incentives. Low level of participation. Having earlier discussed about the literacy campaign, we will be examining its level of participation. Much of the planning and execution of the campaign programs was done at the government secretariat. The value of the bottom-up approach was not yet appreciated. It was therefore not unexpected that the response of tired people at the grassroots was poor. After all, little consultation had taken place, and the people were not bound to be receptive to programs which they had not designed. The people were not convinced that literacy is basic to successful living, as they saw literate Africans who were unpatriotic, selfish, self-serving, arrogant, and morally bankrupt. The illiterate African elders pitied the young literate who spent his fortune buying a tie which was hung around his neck all day, like a goat whose neck remains tied. The colonial officer itself agreed that a man may be healthy, though illiterate. He may be prosperous without being learned. Literacy was also not seen by the indigenous Africans as being capable of teaching the agricultural seasons, which were well known, nor of teaching marketing strategies to groups that had its mastery in the community. Enrollment was therefore not encouraging, and retention was equally discouraging. This suspicion further alienated the people from the campaigns and reduced the level of participation. Motivation is often present, and the will to perform during the limited period so that the objectives to be met are there. On the contrary, the campaigns mounted in Africa did not have the characteristics of a campaign. Attention was not paid to the feature of a swift action. Many of the campaigns were planned for as many as 10 years, Some had no deadline. The absence of a short duration meant that supplies were not diverted to the campaigns, a situation which desired a campaign of much needed resources. Training was not completed before the campaigns began. In many cases, training was not identified as an important area in the campaign. Yet, the training of adult education personnel as organizers, supervisors, and instructors is crucial as the teaching of the adult has to consider issues special to adult learners. As the Nairobi Conference of 1926 advised, training for adult education should, as far as practicable, include all those aspects of skill, knowledge, understanding, and personal attitude which are relevant to the various functions undertaken. Taking into account the general background against which adult education takes place, the issue of the design of appropriate curriculum, innovative teaching method, and necessary learning environment, acceptable evaluation mode, and retention strategies needed for effective performance was neglected. Very little research was undertaken before the campaigns were mounted, and failure was both expected and deserved. Opposition of colonial officers. Knowing full well that mass literacy campaign has set goals to be achieved which could lift up millions of Nigerians from illiteracy, it is then essential to note that there were some colonial officials who opposed it. Most of the articulate officials of the colonial government opposed the idea of mass literacy. For example, the public relations officer to the colonial government based in Lagos submitted that there was not much use for literacy in a place where the local culture can do without it. Another official, the acting chief conservator of forests, informed the chief secretary to the government of Nigeria that an illiterate can often reason with native good sense and instinct regarding those affairs amongst which he is brought up. It is an indisputable fact that the illiterates of a Nigerian village are often sounder in their judgment than their educated sons, who have absorbed ideas but not the power of appraising their real worth. In the view of these officials, literacy programs were a waste and mass literacy campaigns were unnecessary and useless to the development process. In place of mass literacy, many of the leading officials proposed a scheme of education for the average scholars who lacked discipline and were swollen with a sense of their own self-importance and superiority, considering manual labor as degrading and despising their illiterate brothers at home. Even the district officer was opposed to the idea of introducing literacy on a large scale. A.F. Abel, the district officer of Ibadan, drew attention to the danger of having a mass of people who would acquire the skill of reading daily newspapers, most of which were already critical of colonial rule, as he puts it. I am frankly horrified at the thought of millions more readers of the pilot. It is surely realized that if mass literacy was achieved now, we should merely produce so many discontented with their lot and distrustful of their government, for that appears to be the main object of some of our most widely read papers today. While the Colonial Office in London showed some interest in the mass literacy campaign, the bulk of the officials who would implement the project were not favorably disposed to it. The officials were anxious to kill the nuisance, socio-political menace throughout Africa. These officials had thus concluded, as O.V. Lee convincingly puts it, that the stock tactics advocated by the Committee for the Mass Development of Welfare and Education amongst millions of mainly literate Africans, the great majority of whom have barely emerged from the lower stages of civilization, would not feel sure meet with any marked degree of success. Colonialism is by its nature exploitative and arrogant and can only give half-hearted support to the programs and projects aimed at the emancipation of the subject population. It is also true that an alien leadership can hardly lead an army of local populace to rediscover itself. There was therefore no surprise that A.J. Carpenter, the most energetic of the colonial officials, was forced to retire prematurely from his position as mass education officer when he was only 45 years old. Study session summary. In this study session, we define mass literacy campaign by identifying its features and objectives. We also discuss the efforts of various bodies connected with the literacy campaign and highlighted the constraints which made the failure of the campaigns inevitable. Lastly, we noted that limitation of resources, absence of political will, and lack of commitment killed the literacy campaigns. End of study session 6. Thanks for listening.